The 1980s weren't just the golden era of slasher flicks. They birthed some of the most extreme, gut-wrenching horrors ever filmed. Some were so shocking, they remain illegal to this day. From courtrooms to custom seizures, these movies are still banned somewhere in the world. Let's revisit the 13 most brutal horror films of the decade, still forbidden. Number 13. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Few films in cinema history have matched the raw, unfiltered brutality of Cannibal Holocaust. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, this Italian exploitation classic didn't just push boundaries, it obliterated them. Set as a found-footage tale of a documentary crew lost in the Amazon, it shocked audiences with its hyper-realistic depictions of violence, cruelty, and animal slaughter. Upon its release, authorities in Italy arrested Deodato, suspecting that he had actually murdered his actors on camera. Though the charges were dropped after the cast appeared in court alive, the film's extreme gore and depictions of sexual violence kept it on the radar of censors worldwide. In New Zealand, the Office of Film and Literature Classification declared it objectionable, meaning it is illegal to possess or distribute. Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority also refused classification, effectively banning any form of public or private distribution. Iceland, known for some of Europe's strictest obscenity laws, still lists it as banned. Even in countries where it's allowed, the uncut version is often heavily edited, stripping away the most graphic moments. Yet, despite decades of outrage, Cannibal Holocaust has achieved cult status, praised by some as a raw anti-imperialist statement, condemned by others as sadistic trash. One thing's certain, this is one jungle journey you won't see playing in any theater in New Zealand or Singapore anytime soon. Number 12, Necromantic, 1987. Germany's Jörg Buttgereit created Necromantic not as a gore fest, but as a surreal, taboo-shattering art film. Still, its content was so transgressive that it quickly became one of the most infamous banned films of all time. The plot follows a man who works for a street cleaning agency, recovering bodies from accident scenes. But his true obsession? Necrophilia. Even by 1980s exploitation standards, the imagery was extreme. Graphic depictions of intercourse with corpses, disturbing close-ups of decomposition, and a dreamlike, nightmarish atmosphere that lingers long after the credits roll. In New Zealand, it was classified as objectionable, making it illegal to possess or view. Singapore's censors refused classification entirely. In Australia, it has never received an official rating, meaning the uncut film is illegal to sell or screen. Malaysia's strict film control laws have kept it blacklisted since the 1990s, and Iceland remains steadfast in its ban. What makes Necromantic unique is that it isn't simply shock for shock's sake. It's laced with grim humor, loneliness, and a bleak commentary on societal alienation. Yet for all its artistic ambition, its extreme subject matter ensures it stays locked out of mainstream distribution in multiple nations, over 3 decades later. Number 11. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. There are horror films, and then there's Men Behind the Sun, a movie so disturbing it's still hard to believe it was ever made. Directed by T.F. Mouse, this Chinese production depicts the real-life atrocities committed by Japan's Unit 731 during World War II. The unflinching recreation of human experimentation includes scenes of frostbite amputations, pressure chamber deaths, and vivisections, many of which were rumored to use actual cadavers. In Australia, the uncut film was refused classification, which means it's banned from sale, rental, or public screening. Only a censored R18+ version can legally be distributed. The ban stems from the film's graphic depictions of torture and war crimes, which censors argue could cause offense, distress, or even be used as propaganda. In other countries, the movie has been heavily cut, removing the most shocking moments to pass local ratings boards. Still, the uncut version circulates underground among collectors, often imported illegally. For many historians and cinephiles, Men Behind the Sun is more than a horror film. It's a disturbing historical document. But for censorship boards, its graphic realism is simply too much for public consumption. Number 10. In a Glass Cage, 1986. Few films unsettle the soul like Agustí Villaronga's In a Glass Cage. A Spanish psychological horror, it blends historical trauma, sexual depravity, and claustrophobic tension into a work that is both haunting and horrifying. The story centers on a former Nazi doctor, now paralyzed and confined to an iron lung, who is cared for by a young male nurse. This nurse, however, harbors his own twisted agenda, one rooted in revenge, obsession, and a replication of the doctor's crimes. From its opening scenes, the film challenges viewers with imagery of abuse, cruelty, and manipulation. The atmosphere is suffocating, with every sound of the breathing apparatus acting like a metronome of dread. Critics have noted the film's stark, painterly visuals, and the performances that bring an almost unbearable tension to the screen. But, while many call it a masterpiece of art horror, censors in Australia took a very different view. In 1995, the Australian Classification Board refused classification entirely, citing its portrayal of sexualized violence involving minors. This RAC status effectively banned it from legal sale, hire, or public screening. A DVD release in 2005 was also refused, confirming the ban remained in place decades later. Unlike splatter films that rely on gallons of fake blood, In a Glass Cage horrifies through implication and psychological decay. Yet this very subtlety makes it even more disturbing. It's a film that lingers in the mind long after viewing. While it has been screened in festivals and retrospectives in some countries, Australia's outright ban means the film exists there only in whispered recommendation and underground circulation. Number 9. Faces of Death, 2, 1981. If the original Faces of Death pushed boundaries, its sequel went even further and paid the price with an enduring ban in Australia. Faces of Death 2, like its predecessor, is a mondo shockumentary, blending staged scenes with real-life footage of death and injury. From grisly accidents to ritual killings, the film claims to document the extremes of human mortality. While some of the material is fake, a significant portion is genuine news or documentary footage. This blend of fact and fabrication caused controversy worldwide, with critics accusing the filmmakers of exploiting real suffering for profit. Supporters argued it was a macabre look at death as a universal truth. In Australia, the Classification Board refused classification, citing depictions of actual death and injury likely to offend a reasonable adult. The RC status means the film cannot be sold, rented, or publicly exhibited, an outright ban in all but name. While the internet has made obtaining such material easier, importing it remains risky, with customs able to seize copies. Outside Australia, the film has been released in heavily cut editions, stripping out the most graphic sequences. Still, even with its notoriety, Faces of Death 2 occupies a strange space between exploitation cinema and documentary, reviled by some, revered by cult collectors, and illegal in its full form, down under. Number 8. Faces of Death 3, 1985. The third installment in the infamous Faces of Death series continued its grim exploration of mortality, with even less concern for narrative and more focus on pure shock value. Like the earlier entries, Faces of Death the Third intercuts staged gore sequences with real footage, military executions, fatal accidents, and unsettling scenes of animal slaughter. Australian censors were unwavering. The film was refused classification upon review, maintaining the series' position as one of the longest-running bans in the country's censorship history. The rationale was identical to that for Part 2. The inclusion of genuine death footage was deemed too extreme and too likely to offend. For fans, the Faces of Death films are a dark rite of passage, part of the VHS era's underground trading culture. For censors, they are the embodiment of why classification systems exist. The continued RC status of Faces of Death 3 means that, officially, it's as forbidden now as it was in the mid-1980s. And yet, thanks to digital sharing and the persistence of collectors, its shadow presence endures, out of sight but never truly gone. Number 7. Begotten, 1989. Some films unsettle because of what they show. Begotten disturbs because of what it feels like. E. Elias Merhide is experimental. Horror is a black and white nightmare with no dialogue, only haunting sound design and stark imagery. It opens with a godlike figure disemboweling itself, birthing a woman, and spirals into a surreal, mythic journey of violence and decay. The visuals are grainy, degraded, each frame looking like it's been soaked in ash and blood. Scenes of torture, death, and ritual unfold in slow, disorienting rhythms. For those who experience it, Begotten is less a narrative than an ordeal. Merhag himself described it as a film that could have been unearthed from the Stone Age, an artifact of primal fears. Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA, refused classification for Begotten, effectively banning it from public screening or distribution. Under Singaporean law, refused classification means the content is considered to undermine public morality, decency, or order, making it illegal to import or sell. Outside Singapore, the film has had a more complicated journey. In the United States, it was released on VHS and later DVD through niche distributors, gaining a reputation as one of the most unsettling art horror films ever made. Film scholars praise its audacity and its ability to evoke ancient archetypal terror. Yet for Singapore's regulators, the extreme ritualistic violence was deemed unacceptable for any audience. The ban remains in place decades later, and Begotten exists there only in legend, spoken of in hushed tones by cinephiles as the movie you can't unsee. Number 6. The New York Ripper, 1982. Lucio Fulci's The New York Ripper is a slasher drenched in sleaze. Set against the neon decay of early 1980s New York, it follows a sadistic killer who slashes women with a razor, all while taunting police with Donald Duck-style phone calls. The violence is graphic, the sexual undertones unmistakable, and the misogyny impossible to ignore. Fulci, already known as the godfather of gore for films like Zombie and The Beyond, crafted this as a blend of giallo mystery and urban horror. But where other slashers left room for implied violence, the New York Ripper lingered on it. Slow, explicit shots of knives cutting flesh, intertwined with sexualized imagery. New Zealand's Office of Film and Literature Classification banned the film outright, designating it objectionable. This status makes it illegal to possess, import, or distribute. Authorities cited its combination of sexual violence and prolonged cruelty as exceeding acceptable limits for classification. In some European countries, edited versions exist, trimming away the most explicit killings. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification originally refused it, but later passed a heavily cut version. Still, in New Zealand, no cuts could save it. Its core premise and tone were deemed beyond the pale. To this day, The New York Ripper remains one of the most controversial entries in Fulci's filmography, loved by exploitation. Fans, loathed by censors, and locked out of legal access in New Zealand. Number 5. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, 1981. Also known simply as Nightmare, this American slasher earned notoriety as one of the UK's video nasties, and an enduring target of censorship. Directed by Romano Scavolini, it tells the story of a recently released mental patient plagued by violent hallucinations and an uncontrollable urge to kill. What sets it apart from other slashers is its intensity. The gore effects created by special effects legend Tom Savini were so realistic that British authorities prosecuted a distributor for releasing it uncut. In New Zealand, the film was classified objectionable, making it illegal to view, own, or distribute. The ruling emphasized its sexualized violence, prolonged sadism, and graphic murders involving women and children. No edited version has been approved for legal release there. Elsewhere, Nightmares in a Damaged Brain has occasionally resurfaced in cut editions, but its reputation as one of the nastiest slashers of the early 80s persists. For fans, it's an underground classic, a relic of the VHS horror boom. For censors in New Zealand, it's exactly the sort of film classification laws exist to block. Number 4. The House on the Edge of the Park, 1980. Ruggero Deodato is infamous for Cannibal Holocaust, but his follow-up, The House on the Edge of the Park, proved just as controversial, if not more so in some countries. This Italian exploitation thriller follows two street thugs who crash a high society party and proceed to terrorize the guests through humiliation, assault, and sadistic games. From the opening sequence, featuring a shockingly brutal attack, the film plunges into a relentless parade of cruelty. While Deodato reportedly intended it as a social allegory about class warfare, the execution leans heavily on graphic depictions of sexualized violence. The slow pacing of these scenes, combined with the aggressor's smirking sadism, was enough to trigger bans across the globe. In New Zealand, the Office of Film and Literature Classification declared the film objectionable. This designation makes it illegal to possess or distribute in any form. The reasoning was blunt. The film was seen as promoting or normalizing sexual violence and humiliation, without sufficient artistic justification. Even the UK, which eventually released a cut version, initially banned it as a video nasty in the 1980s. In the US, it slipped under the radar in the VHS era, but has never seen a mainstream uncut release. Today, The House on the Edge of the Park occupies a strange place in cinema history. Denounced as pure exploitation by some, and defended as biting social commentary by others. In New Zealand, however, it remains locked away as one of the most dangerous films of its era. Number 3. Anthropophagus, 1980. Sometimes called The Grim Reaper, Joe D'Amato's Anthropophagus is a grimy, sun-baked slice of Italian horror that became legendary for one scene in particular. The story follows a group of travelers stranded on a Greek island where they encounter a deformed, cannibalistic killer. While most of the film plays like a slow-burn slasher, its climax delivers two moments so shocking they cemented its place in censorship history. The killer tearing a fetus from a pregnant woman, and later feasting on his own entrails. These scenes were beyond the pale for many audiences in the 1980s, and they remain so for New Zealand's classification board, which banned the film outright as objectionable. This status means it is illegal to possess, view, or distribute the film within New Zealand. Attempts to release edited versions have failed, as the most infamous scenes are integral to the plot's resolution. While it's been released uncut in some European territories and even received special edition Blu-rays for horror collectors, its notoriety still drives curiosity. For censors in New Zealand, however, Anthropophagus remains an unthinkable addition to the legal film market. Number 2. Men Behind the Sun. Although Men Behind the Sun already appeared earlier in this list, its censorship story is unique enough to merit a deeper look. The film exists in multiple versions, and the differences determine its legal status in certain countries. In Australia, the uncut edition remains refused classification, meaning outright banned, while a cut version has been granted an R18+ rating. The edits remove specific sequences depicting medical experiments and cruelty toward animals, which the classification board determined could cause offense to a reasonable adult, and lacked sufficient historical context to justify their inclusion. This dual status situation means that while a heavily edited Men Behind the Sun can legally be sold or screened in Australia, importing or possessing the uncut print is a criminal offense. Collectors who want the unaltered version must turn to overseas sources, often risking seizure by customs. The ban's persistence highlights how certain imagery, especially when tied to real-world historical atrocities, remains politically and ethically sensitive, even decades after its creation. Number 1. Cannibal Holocaust. Though we covered Cannibal Holocaust earlier, the story of its uncut version deserves its own place in censorship history. Many films have had their bans lifted through cuts or reclassification, but Cannibal Holocaust, in its original unaltered form, remains forbidden in multiple countries more than 40 years after release. The New Zealand Classification Board has never wavered. The film is officially objectionable in any form that includes its original sequences of animal cruelty and sexual violence. This means possession, importation, or public exhibition of the uncut print is illegal, with penalties that can include fines and imprisonment. Singapore's Infocom, Media Development Authority, takes an equally hard stance, refusing classification outright and maintaining that the content breaches public morality laws. Iceland, despite its small market for exploitation cinema, continues to list the film among prohibited works. Even in countries where it has been re-released, the uncut version is often restricted to underground screenings or specialty import shops willing to risk seizure by customs. The UK, for instance, only allowed the uncut version to be legally sold in 2011, after decades of cuts. Australia has passed edited versions, but continues to ban the fully intact original. This persistence is partly because the uncut film contains not just simulated gore, but genuine animal killings captured on camera, an element that censors find indefensible, regardless of artistic intent. For its defenders, Cannibal Holocaust remains a grim allegory about colonial exploitation and media sensationalism. For its critics, it is a morally bankrupt piece of shock cinema that exploits suffering for spectacle. More than 4 decades later, the fact that this film's uncut form is still contraband in multiple nations speaks volumes about its enduring power and its unshakable notoriety. These 13 horror films from the 1980s remain as dangerous to censors today as when they first shocked audiences. Banned, cut, or buried, they survive in whispers and underground trades. Which of these would you dare to watch? Like, subscribe, and share if you're brave enough.